Hello. Happy Friday. How's it going? Friday the 11th. It's already the 11th of March, 2022. I feel like January. January maybe didn't disappear too fast, but February felt like it just vanished on me. Is the stream coming through alright? Why is it still. Do I need to refresh over here? Yes, I needed to refresh my browser. And March, I don't know. Does it feel like the 11th of March already? I don't know about that. I don't know. I feel like maybe, oh, hello, Sharky. How was your Friday? How was your week? Did you get through alright? Feels like Smarch? The secret month. I have. Pocky. Lousy Smarch weather. Hello. It was snowing? What? Where were you? Were you in like Squamish or something? Oh, I guess you're not doing background stuff right now, are you? Yeah. Just like, did I hear snacks? And then it just, oh, there he goes. Briefly in Metrotown. Oh. I was out and about a little bit today, but I guess not for that period of time. It did start to rain a little bit. I think it'll be fine. Probably. Pocky. Cookies and cream Pocky. Which I feel like Pocky itself is already kind of a cookie. So does that mean just cream? Always drive on all season. Between Farmos and I, we do too much driving to not use winter tires. And, I don't know. I have had some... I totaled a car when we lived in Langley. Because we lived in this house that was just in a terrible position at, like, the top of this valley. So, like, when you were driving to get there, you'd come along this road and then it would go down around a corner and then back up. And there were always car accidents there. And one night I was driving home from work, and I guess there had just been freezing rain. So I get to the bottom of the valley and spin and smash into this barricade, and my car kind of goes up like this. And I look down, and I'm like, oh, I could die right now. But then the car came back down, and yeah, so that car was a write-off. So that experience pushed me more towards using winter tires. You remember that house? Mr. Sharky's brother also totaled a car on that road on the bridge in the ravine part. That road is terrible. How? Yeah. There were some good times living at that house. It was a nice place. Um, but there were some bad times living at that house too. Our furnace broke, just died in the middle of winter. That wasn't great. Um, and like our landlord when we lived there, because we didn't own that house, we were renting. And our landlord was just like always around outside the house, like puttering around and tinkering with stuff and things like that. And it just made me kind of uncomfortable. I didn't like he was and like he made some big like he put up a whole fence around the property without our permission, without even talking to us about it. And just I don't know. So we were like, no, let's move out. And then Farmhouse and I moved from there to Steveston. And the day that we like Farmhouse was out signing the lease for our apartment in Steveston, and when she came back home, our house had been broken into on like that day. And so it was like it's a good thing we're moving out. It's a few things stolen then, which kind of sucked. To be fair, 11 p.m. on a Sunday is kind of a rough time to be ordering delivery. Or I must remember is making emergency mac and cheese. Anyways, long story short, I think that it's a good idea to use winter tires in winter in BC. Which is like, it's a big investment, but then you've got them. And, you just swap them on and off as long as you've got somewhere to store them. And some places will store them for you. I'm sure there's a fee associated. Like, if you, where they swap your tires for you. So, like, you buy the winter tires from them. They swap them over. They keep your all season tires until you decide to until you come back and swap back, and then they keep your winter tires until the next winter. So you don't even necessarily need storage, but I think it's probably a good idea to store them yourself if you can. That was the first time in years you'd had craft dinner. I definitely don't have it as frequently these days. I was noticing as I sat down here today that apparently on Wednesday, I don't know when it happened specifically, it must have been after the stream, but someone named Books, Brews, and Booze followed my channel. So I guess it's kind of on theme, and they must also do book-related content. But I don't know who that is, if it's someone that I know. I suppose I could look at their channel. Maybe I can. Whatever. I'll figure it out later. So, speaking of book, as we frequently do speak of book, why did you go out of focus there? That was just unnecessary. Come on. Speaking of book, wow. No, that didn't do it. It doesn't recognize me. Stream just feels like reminiscing. Is that what this looks like? It's all blurry for the flashback. I see. Come on. It just annoys. Oh, it focused up right before I did that, didn't it? Yep. All right. So we're on chapter 15, which for my copy is on page 166. And there's quite a lot that happened in the past 2 chapters that we read on Wednesday. They got out of the forest of Vordieu. After that, it ran in with the monk and the toll collector and everything. Lembor got murdered, and they saw Brill in that same town. I don't think that town was even named, was it? Yeah, it was just a sizable town. Lembor got murdered, and we learned that the legionnaires are vowed to be neutral in these political struggles. Silk did some disguising to spy on Brill. Then they snuck out, but then they got captured by the troops of Count Dravor, which was more like really the troops of Eddings. And then so they learned that Eternal Salmistra, Queen of Nyssa, lots of S's involved with Nysans. Eddings, Salmistra, Nyssa. I think the god of Nyssa is Issa, maybe? But I could be wrong about that. One of those towns that builds an oversized sculpture to become a tourist attraction. World's largest bottle of poison. No, that would be in Nyssa. I'm getting mixed up here. Yeah. So they then broke out of Count Dravor's dungeons, and Silk set the place on fire on their way out. And that's roughly where we're at. Sharky say, Eddings kind of sounds like a slurred slang of, are you dissing me? Or, Eddings? Eddings? Huh? Eddings? You dissing me? And that's where we're at, yeah. I feel like the group has gotten quite large at this point. So we've got Garion, Mr. Wolf, Aunt Pole, Barak, Silk, Hetar, Mandaralin, Dernick. Am I forgetting anybody? I think we've got 8 right now. No Leldoran, so we're not at 9. We're not counting the horses, even though that might be rude. They don't have names that we've been told. You only get counted if you have a name. So I think we're at 8 members, right? I think so. It's gotten large enough that occasionally someone speaks up and I'm like, oh yeah, they're here too. Oh yeah, Mandaralin. Yeah. All right. Let's get into chapter 15. We are over halfway through the book. And still only one woman. Yep. Possibly the member of the group that most people are most afraid of, including Mr. Wolf. But, yeah. Yep, so far we are just Aunt Pole is actually traveling with them. I think we've had a few what I would consider positive depictions of female characters, but it's definitely not every case. And as you were mentioning before, generally not the younger ones. Although I would say Queen Porenne is an exception. Because Queen Porenne, I think, is somewhat considered younger. She's not Garion's age. Um, but she seemed very capable. Um, yeah. And a few different sort of personalities. Queen Layla, also, very cute character. Just that sort of like, I don't know, the mother of Sindaria. It's cute. Got some sirens out there. Oh. I saw one of the lights, but I don't know how I could have. Maybe it was on the highway and I saw a reflection on the window. Because there's just a house across from us and we're in a strata, so there's no way they just tore through here. So it must have been going by on the highway. There's a window that you can see the highway from there and it must have reflected. Thankfully our pup is not one for howling. Yeah, that's true. Alright. There, not to be spoilery, but there's a character coming up that I'm like almost nervous about people meeting. We'll see. We'll see. I don't know how far away that is. Alright, I'm going to get into it. Chapter 15. They rode hard for the next several days, stopping only long enough to rest the horses and catch a few hours' sleep at infrequent intervals. The way you've lambasted other characters. Yeah, there's a character I can't talk about it. Like, there are various characters in these books that I feel like, and we've seen examples of this with like Mandaralin and somewhat with Leldorin, where they'll either start off seeming dislikable, but then it turns out there's more to them, or they'll just need to go through some character growth. They need to learn and, better themselves. Farmo says, just keep reading. All right, okay. No, I'm not saying you should go easy on them. It's the fun. It's fun. It's part of the fun of reading and discussing the books as we go. So uh, I'm gonna keep reading. I gotta stop that. All right, here we go. Stopping only long enough to rest the horses and catch a few hours' sleep at infrequent intervals. Garion found that he could doze in his saddle whenever they walked the horses. Mr. Wolf's skill is rubbing off on Garion. He found, indeed, that if he were tired enough, he could sleep almost any place. Yeah, I definitely had that when I was younger. One afternoon, as they rested from the driving pace Wolf set, he heard Silk talking to the old man and Aunt Pole. Curiosity finally won out over exhaustion. Farmos is agreeing around his age. Yeah, maybe you could sleep any place. There were definitely some instances where I remember being like, wow, I fell asleep just sitting, like not even lying down. Oh, Garion eavesdropping. This is Garion overhearing. They're traveling as a group. I don't know if it's necessarily the same as eavesdropping. We'll see. I think eavesdropping is more like with more intent. He heard Silk talking to the old man and Aunt Pole. Curiosity finally won out over exhaustion, and he roused himself enough to listen. Okay, it's eavesdropping. He roused himself enough to listen. All right. I'd still like to know more about Selmisra's involvement in this, the little man was saying. She's an opportunist, Wolf said. Any time there's turmoil, she tries to turn it to her own advantage. That means we'll have to dodge Nysans as well as Murgos. Garion opened his eyes. Okay, maybe it's not eavesdropping in this case. Why do they call her Eternal Selmisra? He asked Aunt Pole. Is she very old? No, Aunt Pole answered. The queens of Nyssa are always named Selmisra, that's all. Do you know this particular one? I don't have to, she told him. They're always exactly the same. They all look alike and act alike. If you know one, you know them all. She's going to be terribly disappointed with Ydis, Silk observed, grinning. I imagine that Ydis has taken some quiet, painless way out by now, Wolf said. Yeah. Selmisra grows a bit excessive when she's irritated. Is she so cruel, then? Garion asked. Not cruel, exactly, Wolf explained. Nysans admire serpents. If you annoy a snake, he'll bite you. He's a simple creature, but very logical. Once he bites you, he doesn't hold any further grudges. Do we have to talk about snakes? Silk asked in a pained voice. We got a little more not Han Solo, but a little more Harrison Ford in general there. I think the horses are rested now, Hatar said from behind them. We can go now. Why does it have to be snakes? They pushed the horses back into a gallop and pounded south toward the broad valley of the Nedrain River and Tol Honeth, which I believe Tol Honeth is the capital. The sun turned warm, and the trees along the way were budding in the first days of spring. The gleaming imperial city, there you go, was situated on an island in the middle of the river, and all roads led there. It was clearly visible in the distance as they crested the last ridge and looked down into the fertile valley, and it seemed to grow larger with each passing mile as they approached it. It's funny how that works. It was built entirely of white marble, and it dazzled the eye in the mid-morning sun. The walls were high and thick, and towers soared above them within the city. A bridge arched gracefully across the rippled face of a Nedrain. That seems wrong. A Nedrain? Like, the Nedrain is the river. So unless there's multiple Nedrains, but even then that seems kind of weird. I was just looking at the map. Feels like it should be the Nedrain to me. To the bronze expanse of the North Gate, where a glittering detachment of legionnaires marched perpetual guard. Silk pulled on his conservative cloak and cap, as opposed to his liberal, I suppose, or anyways, and drew himself up, his face assuming that sober, businesslike expression that meant that he was undergoing a private internal transition that seemed to make him almost believe himself that he was the Drasnian merchant whose identity he assumed. Your business in Tol Honeth? One of the legionnaires asked politely. I am Radek of Boktor, Silk said, with the preoccupied air of a man whose mind was on business. Yours says the Nedrain. Huh. Yeah, mine definitely just says Rippled face of Nedrain. He took off his wig. Bum. I am Radek of Boktor, Silk said with the preoccupied air of a man whose mind was on business. I have Sandarian woolens of the finest quality. You will probably want to talk with the steward of the central market then, the legionnaire suggested. Thank you, Silk nodded and led them through the gate into the broad and crowded streets beyond. Pretty painless. I think I'd better stop by the palace and have a talk with Ran Boroon, Mr. Wolf said. The Boroons aren't the easiest emperors to deal with, but they're the most intelligent. All right. I shouldn't have too much trouble convincing him that the situation's serious. How are you going to get to see him? Aunt Pole asked him. It could take weeks to get an appointment. You know how they are. Mr. Wolf made a sour face. I suppose I could make a ceremonial visit of it, he said as they pushed their horses through the crowd. And announce your presence to the whole city. Do I have any choice? I have to nail down the Tolnedrans. We can't afford to have them neutral. Could I make a suggestion? Barak asked. I'll listen to anything at this point. Why don't we go see Grinneg? Barak asked. He's the Cherok ambassador here in Tol Honeth. He could get us into the palace to see the Emperor without all that much fuss. That's not a bad idea, Belgarath, Silk agreed. Grinneg's got enough connections in the palace to get us inside quickly, and Ran Boroon respects him. That only leaves the problem of getting in to see the ambassador, Dernick said, as they stopped to let a heavy wagon pass into a side street. He's my cousin, Barak said. He and Anheg and I used to play together when we were children. The big man looked around. He's supposed to have a house near the garrison of the 3rd Imperial Legion. I suppose we could ask somebody the way. That won't be necessary, Silk said. I know where it is. I should have known, Barak grinned. We can go through the North Marketplace, Silk said. The garrison's located near the main wharves on the downstream end of the island. Lead the way, Wolf told him. I don't want to waste too much time here. The streets of Tol Honeth teemed with people from all over the world. Drasnians and Revans rubbed elbows with Nissans and Thulls. There was a sprinkling, not a sparkling. There was a sprinkling of Nadraks in the crowd, and, to Garion's eye, a disproportionate number of Murgos. Aunt Pole rode close beside Hetar, talking quietly to him. I'm jumbling up words. What's going on? Talking quietly to him and frequently laying her hand lightly on his sword arm. The lean Algar's eyes burned, and his nostrils flared dangerously each time he saw a scarred Murgo face. This is something that we, kind of a subtle thing that I feel like we see from Aunt Pole a lot. She knows, usually, when somebody is going to be under either emotional, distress, or just stressed out in some way, and she frequently works to counteract that. She knows how everybody else in the group is thinking and feeling, and she maintains that and helps people, through difficult situations, I feel like. Because this isn't the first time we've run into this sort of thing. And when she needs to, she also manipulates them, like with Leldorin in Arendia. Very empathetic, says Farmos. Yeah. But, yeah. And sometimes it's just something kind of small like this, where there are lots of Murgos around, so Aunt Pole goes to Hatar and makes sure that he doesn't, build up too much stress and have a limit break and lash out. If Hatar were a Solar and Exalted, Murgos would be him rolling limit, I feel like. And in the game called Exalted, you play basically like a demigod character. But everyone in the Sparkling of Nadrax sounds like a collective noun. You'd be a fan of using a disproportion of Murgos. Reminds you of an unkindness of ravens. I thought it was a murder of... Oh, no, it's a murder of crows. Right. But yeah, in Exalted, which is a tabletop role-playing game, every character will have something unique to them that basically stresses them out. And if that comes up, then you roll a dice to find out whether you gain a point of limit. And there's very few, almost no ways to reduce your limit. And if you ever get to 10 points of limit, your character loses it for a certain amount of time and might do something really bad. You kind of lose control of your character. They might, just start crying, but that could happen in the middle of a battle. Like, they would just stop where they are and just start sobbing. Or you might start murdering your friends. Or you might just start taking every illicit substance you can get your hands on and then looking for more. Basically, it's like they go through an extreme break where they need to do something cathartic. And the storyteller tends to usually take control of your character when it happens. So, I feel like for Hatar, being in too close proximity to Murgos would probably be rolling limit. And if he gets, too high up, then no matter their circumstance, he's just got to kill some Murgos. Something like that. Anyways, I got sidetracked. The houses along the wide streets were imposing, with white marble facades and heavy doors, quite often guarded by private mercenary soldiers who glared belligerently at passers-by. "The imperial city seems awash with suspicion," Mandaralin observed. "Do they fear their neighbors so?" "Troubled times," Silk explained. "And the merchant princes of Tol Honeth keep a great deal of the world's wealth in their counting rooms. There are men along this street who could buy most of Arendia if they wanted to." "Arendia is not for sale," Mandaralin said stiffly. "In Tol Honeth, my dear Baron, everything's for sale," Silk told him. "Honor, virtue, friendship, love. It's a wicked city full of wicked people, and money's the only thing that matters." "I expect you fit right in, then," Barak said. Silk laughed. "I like Tol Honeth," he admitted. "The people here have no illusions. They're refreshingly corrupt." "You're a bad man, Silk," Barak stated bluntly. "So you've said before," the rat-faced little Drasnian said with a mocking grin. Farmo says a sparkling of Nadrax makes them sound like a champagne. The banner of Cherek, the outline of a white war boat on an azure background, fluttered from a pole surmounting the gate of the ambassador's house. Barak dismounted a bit stiffly and strode to the iron grill which blocked the gate. "Tell Grinneg that his cousin Barak is here to see him," he announced to the bearded guards inside. "How do we know you're his cousin?" one of the guards demanded roughly. Barak reached through the grill almost casually and took hold of the front of the guard's mail shirt. He pulled the man up firmly against the bars.
"Would you like to rephrase that question," he asked, "while you still have your health?" "Excuse me, Lord Barak," the man apologized quickly. "Now that I'm closer, I do seem to recognize your face." "I was almost sure you would," Barak said. "Let me unlock the gate for you," the guard suggested. "Excellent idea," Barak said, letting go of the man's shirt. Chucky said, "You're a bad man, Charlie Brown." Oh, don't be so harsh on Charlie Brown. Charlie's a good man. The guard opened the gate quickly, and the party rode into a spacious courtyard. Grinneg, the ambassador of King Anheg to the imperial court at Tolhoneth, was a burly man almost as big as Barak. His beard was trimmed very short, and he wore a Tolnedran-style blue mantle. He came down the stairs 2 at a time and caught Barak in a vast bear hug. Well, that's a little off color, isn't it? Bear hug? That's just rude. Barak's very sensitive about that. Bar hug? Did I pronounce it weirdly? Or did you just typo? Oh, no, you just typo. "You pirate!" he roared. "What are you doing in Tolhoneth?" "Anheg's decided to invade the palace," Barak joked. "As soon as we've rounded up all the gold and young women, we're going to let you burn the city." Grinneg's eyes glittered with a momentary hunger. "Wouldn't that infuriate them?" he said with a vicious grin. "What happened to your beard?" Barak asked. Grinneg coughed and looked embarrassed. "It's not important," he said quickly. "We've never had any secrets," Barak accused. Grinneg spoke quietly to his cousin for a moment, looking very ashamed of himself, and Barak burst out with a great roar of laughter. "Why did you let her do that?" he demanded. "I was drunk," Grinneg said. "Let's go inside. I've got a keg of good ale in my cellar." The rest of them followed the 2 big men into the house, and they went down a broad hallway to a room with Cherek furnishings. Heavy chairs and benches covered with skins, a rush-strewn floor, and a huge fireplace where the butt end of a large log smoldered. I like that they're in the middle of the imperial capital, this gleaming city of white marble, but you go inside the Cherek ambassador complex, and suddenly you're back in Cherek. Like, making this place feel as much like home as possible. It's just so drastic a change. Like, rush-strewn floor. They're in the imperial capital. They don't have carpets. They've got rushes on the floor. A huge fireplace where the butt end of a large log smoldered. Several pitch-smeared torches smoked in iron rings on the stone wall. And here we go. "I feel more at home here," Grinneg said. Yeah, that holds up. All right, just what I was saying. A servant brought tankards of dark brown ale for them all, and then quietly left the room. Garion quickly lifted his tankard and took a large swallow of the bitter drink before Aunt Pole could suggest something more bland. "Oh,"
She watched him without comment, her eyes expressionless. Someone's pushing his luck, I think. Carrion has decided that if someone hands him a drink, he's gonna drink it. Grinneg sprawled in a large, hand-hewn chair with a bearskin tossed over it.
"Why are you really in Tolhoneth, Barak?" he asked. "Grinneg," Barak said seriously. "This is Belgarath. I'm sure you've heard of him."
The ambassador's eyes widened, and he inclined his head.
"My house is yours," he said respectfully.
I feel like his voice has drifted too close to Mr. Wolf's. I think I started out a little bit different, but I'm going to have to change it a little bit next time I get to Grinneg.
"Can you get me in to see Ranboroon?"
Mr. Wolf asked, sitting on a rough bench near the fireplace.
"Without any difficulty."
That's a little better.
"Good," Wolf said. "I have to talk to him, and I don't want to stir up any fuss in the process."
I like how Grinneg didn't ask any questions, just immediately, "Yep, I can do that. I can get you to the Emperor." Pharmo says, "When in Cherrick, do as the Tolnedrans do. When in Tolhoneth, do as the Cherricks do." Oh, it's getting rainy outside. I can hear it. Barak introduced the others, and his cousin nodded politely to each of them.
"You've come to Tolhoneth during a turbulent period,"
he said after the amenities were over. Pharma says, if it's the embassy, technically it would be Cherrick. That's only if it follows Earth politics.
"The nobility of Tolnedra are gathering in the city like ravens on a dead cow."
An unkindness of ravens on a dead cow? We picked up a hint or two of that on our way south, Silk told him. Is it as bad as we heard?
"Probably worse,"
Grinneg said, scratching one ear.
"Dynastic succession only happens a few times in each eon."
Is that 1,000 years? Is an eon 1,000 years? Hey Google, how long is an eon?
By car, the trip to Eon Stone in Thailand.
Nope, stop.
8 minutes with...
It started giving me directions to somewhere. Hey Google, how many years are in an eon?
Billion years.
A billion?
Wikipedia. In astronomy, an eon is defined as a billion years.
People
also ask me,
okay, stop.
what exactly is an eon?
That's a very large number. That's probably not the frame of time that Grinneg's talking about. Yeah, that can't be. That's too long. Anyways, okay, so Farmo says maybe an exaggeration. And it was saying in astrological terms, an eon is, did I say a billion or a million? Billion. So maybe that's astrological terms, but maybe there's a different frame for non-astrological terms, although realistically a billion years, I think you're only speaking in astrological terms, so I don't know. Anyways,
"Probably worse,"
Grinneg said, scratching one ear.
"Dynastic succession only happens a few times in each eon. The Boroons have been in power now for over 600 years, and the other houses are anticipating the changeover with a great deal of enthusiasm." "Who's the most likely to succeed Ranboroon?" Mr. Wolf asked. "Right at the moment, the best would probably be the Grand Duke Cador of Tol Vordew."
We heard of him before. Grinneg answered.
He seems to have more money than the rest. The Honeths are richer, of course, but they've got 7 candidates, and their wealth is spread out a little too thin. The other families aren't really in the running. The Boroons don't have anyone suitable, and no one takes the Ranites seriously.
Garion carefully set his tankard on the floor beside the stool he sat on. The bitter ale didn't really taste that good, and he felt vaguely cheated somehow. The half-tankard he had drunk made his ears quite warm, though, and the end of his nose seemed a little numb. He felt a little cheated. I can understand that. That, like, you know, the adults are drinking this all the time. I want to try it. And then you try it and you're like, this is garbage. I was expecting this to be something good. A Vorduvian we met said that the Horbites are using poison, Silk said.
They all are.
Grinneg wore a slightly disgusted look.
The Horbites are just a little more obvious about it, that's all. If Ran Boroon dies tomorrow, though, Cador will be the next emperor.
Mr. Wolf frowned.
I've never had much success dealing with the Vorduvians. They don't really have imperial stature. The old emperor's still in pretty fair health,
Grinneg said.
If he hangs on for another year or two, the Honeths will probably fall into line behind one candidate, whichever one survives, and then they'll be able to bring all their money to bear on the situation. These things take time, though. The candidates themselves are staying out of town for the most part, and they're all being extremely careful, so the assassins are having a great deal of difficulty reaching them.
He laughed, taking a long drink of ale.
They're a funny people. Could we go to the palace now?
Mr. Wolf asked. We'll want to change clothes first, Aunt Pole said firmly.
Again, Bolgara?
Wolf gave her a long, suffering look. Just do it, Father, she said. I won't let you embarrass us by wearing rags to the palace.
I'm not going to wear that robe again.
The old man's voice was stubborn. No, she said, it wouldn't be suitable. I'm sure the ambassador can lend you a mantle. You won't be quite so obvious that way.
Whatever you say, Pole.
Wolf sighed, giving up. He really does not like that robe. Sharky say bring all their money to bear. I was considering making another bear joke there. Like another, like, this guy really does not care about Barak's feelings. But, I figured I'd pass it by, but apparently I'm not the only one that noticed. Rich bear. Yeah. Bring all their money to Barak. After they had changed, Grinneg formed up his honor guard, a grim-looking group of Cherek warriors, and they were escorted. Farmo says Bear is their best candidate. Bear Honeth. Cherokee say Tolnedran assassins leaving a note at an unsuccessful assassination. We're sorry to have missed you. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to reschedule your murder. It's not that Ankh-Morporkian here. It's close, but that would be in a Terry Pratchett book, as Farmo says. A grim-looking group of Cherek warriors, and they were escorted along the broad avenues of Tol Honeth toward the palace. Garion, all bemused by the opulence of the city, and feeling just a trifle giddy from the effects of the half-tankard of ale he had drunk, rode quietly beside Silk, trying not to gawk at the huge buildings or the richly dressed Tonnedrans strolling with grave decorum in the noonday sun. That brings us to the end of chapter 15 on page 173. I am going to just go straight into chapter 16, which runs through page 187. Chapter 16. The imperial palace sat on a high hill in the center of Tol Honeth. It consisted not of one building, but rather was a complex of many, large and small, all built of marble and surrounded by gardens and lawns where cypress trees cast a pleasing shade. Sharky says he's been wandering through a big city like that before. Through a big city like that before. Drunk Garion is probably less subtle than he thinks. That sounds like a story. The entire compound was enclosed by a high wall, surmounted by statues spaced at intervals along its top. The legionnaires at the palace gate recognized the Cherek ambassador and sent immediately for one of the emperor's chamberlains, a gray-haired official in a brown mantle. Well, it was both of you. The more drunk people in a group there are, I think the more noticeable said group becomes. Pharma says, yeah, if there were any con artists and he was more alone, he'd be getting some sob stories and or babies thrown at him. If he weren't surrounded by Cherek guards.
I need to see Ran Borun, Lord Morin,
Grinneg told him as they all dismounted in a marble courtyard just inside the palace gate.
It's a matter of urgency.
Of course, Lord Grinneg, the gray-haired man assented.
His Imperial Highness is always delighted to speak with the personal envoy of King Anheg. Unfortunately, His Highness is resting just now. I should be able to get you in to see him sometime this afternoon. Tomorrow morning at the latest. This won't wait, Morin,
Grinneg said.
We have to see the Emperor immediately. You'd better go wake him up.
Lord Morin looked surprised.
It can't be that urgent,
he suggested chidingly. Pharma says the babies thing is a thing in Italy, apparently. They throw dolls at tourists so that they drop their purses to catch them. And Sharky say weird, but it seems like it would work.
It can't be that urgent,
he suggested chidingly.
I'm afraid so,
Grinneg said. Morin pursed his lips thoughtfully as he looked at each member of the party.
You know me well enough to realize that I wouldn't ask this lightly, Morin,
Grinneg said. Morin sighed.
I'm trusting you a great deal, Grinneg. All right, come along. Ask your soldiers to wait.
Grinneg made a curt gesture to his guards, and the party followed Lord Morin through a broad courtyard to a columned gallery that ran along one of the buildings.
How's he been?
Grinneg asked as they walked along the shady gallery.
His health is still good,
Morin answered.
But his temper's been deteriorating lately. The Boruns have been resigning their posts in flocks and returning to Tol Borun. That seems prudent under the circumstances,
Grinneg said.
I suspect that a certain number of fatalities are likely to accompany the succession.
Probably so, Morin agreed. But His Highness finds it a bit distressing to be abandoned by members of his own family. He stopped by an arched marble gate where 2 legionnaires in gold-embellished breastplates stood stiffly. Please leave your weapons here. His Highness is sensitive about such things. I'm sure you can understand.
Of course,
Grinneg said, pulling a heavy sword out from under his mantle and leaning it against the wall. They all followed his example, and Lord Morin's eyes flickered slightly with surprise when Silk removed 3 different daggers from various places beneath his garments. Formidable equipment. The Chamberlain's hands flickered in the gestures of the secret language. Troubled times, Silk's fingers explained deprecatingly. Lord Morin smiled faintly and led them through the gate into the garden beyond. The lawn in the garden was neatly manicured. There were softly splashing fountains, and the rose bushes were all well pruned. Fruit trees that seemed to be very old were budding, almost ready to burst into bloom in the warm sun. Sparrows bickered over nesting sites on the twisted limbs. Grinneg and the others followed Morin along a curving marble walk toward the center of the garden. Ranborun the 23rd, Emperor of Tolnedra, I'm pretty sure 23rd, XXIII, yeah, that's X is 10, that's 23rd. Emperor of Tolnedra was a small, elderly man, quite bald, and dressed in a gold-colored mantle. Kind of sounds like a gnome. He lounged in a heavy chair beneath a budding grape arbor, feeding small seeds to a bright canary perched on the arm of his chair. The Emperor had a little beak-like nose and bright, inquisitive eyes. I said I wanted to be left alone, Morin, he said in a testy voice, looking up from the canary. Farmos with the beak-like nose, sounding more gnome-like, yeah. A million apologies, Your Highness, Lord Morin explained, bowing deeply. Lord Grinneg, the ambassador of Cherek, wishes to present you a matter of gravest urgency. He convinced me that it simply could not wait. The Emperor looked sharply at Grinneg. His eyes grew sly, almost malicious. I see that your beard's beginning to grow back, Grinneg. Grinneg's face flushed slowly.
I should have known that your Highness would have heard of my little misfortune.
I know everything that happens in Tol Honeth, Lord Grinneg, the Emperor snapped. Even if all my cousins and nephews are running like rats out of a burning house, I still have a few faithful people around me. Whatever possessed you to take up with that Nadrak woman? I thought you Alorns despised Angarax. Grinneg coughed awkwardly and glanced quickly at Aunt Pole.
It was a kind of joke, Your Highness, he said. I thought it might embarrass the Nadrak ambassador, and his wife is, after all, a handsome-looking woman. I didn't know she kept a pair of scissors under her bed.
She keeps your beard in a little gold box, you know, the Emperor smirked, and she shows it to all her friends. The Nadrak ambassador's wife. Grinneg thought he would get the better of the Nadraks, and they turned it around on him something fierce, it seems. Wow. keeps it she keeps his beard in a little gold box. That's something. That's and shows it to her friend, says Farmhouse.
She's an evil woman,
Grinneg said mournfully. Who are these? The Emperor asked, waving one finger at the members of the party standing on the grass somewhat behind Ambassador Grinneg.
My cousin Barak and some friends,
Grinneg said.
They're the ones who have to talk to you.
The Earl of Trelheim? The Emperor asked. What are you doing in Tolhoneth, my lord?
Passing through, your highness,
Barak replied, bowing. Are Barak and Grinneg discernible enough? I try to do Barak's voice a little deeper and growlier. They're similar, but I figure they're family, you know. They grew up together. Similar voices happens. Sharky say, well, she turned it around. Her husband still might be embarrassed. A little. Maybe. We don't know much about Nadrax. So, you know, tough to say. Ranboroon looked sharply at each of the rest in turn, as if actually seeing them for the first time. And this would be Prince Keldar of Drasnia, he said, who left Tolhoneth in a hurry last time he was here, posing as an acrobat in a traveling circus, I believe, and about one jump ahead of the police. Silk also bowed politely. And Hetar of Algaria, the Emperor continued. He knows everybody by sight. The man who's trying to depopulate Cthulmurgos single-handedly. And details about them. Hetar inclined his head. Morin, the Emperor demanded sharply, why have you surrounded me with Alorns? I don't like Alorns. It's this matter of urgency, your highness, Morin replied apologetically. And an errand, the Emperor said, looking at Mandaralin. A membrate, I should say. His eyes narrowed. From the descriptions I've heard, he could only be the Baron of Vomandor. He's on a roll. Mandaralin's bow was gracefully elaborate. Thine eye is most keen, your highness, to have read us each in turn without prompting. Not all of you, precisely, the Emperor said. I don't recognize the Sendar or the Reven lad. Garion's mind jumped. Barak had once told him that he resembled a Reven more than anything else, but that thought had been lost in the welter of events which had followed the chance remark. Now, the Emperor of Tolnidra, whose eye seemed to have an uncanny ability to penetrate to the true nature of things, had also identified him as a Reven. He glanced quickly at Aunt Pole, but she seemed absorbed in examining the buds on a rosebush. The Sendar is Dernick, Mr. Wolf said, a smith. In Sendaria, that useful trade is considered somewhat akin to nobility. The lad is my grandson, Garion. The Emperor looked at the old man. It seems that I should know who you are. There's something about you. He paused thoughtfully. The canary, which had been perched on the arm of the Emperor's chair, suddenly burst into song. He launched himself into the air and fluttered directly to Aunt Pole. She held out her finger, and the bright bird landed there, and tipped back his head and sang ecstatically as if his tiny heart were breaking with adoration. She listened gravely to his song. She wore a dark blue dress, elaborately laced at the bodice, and a short sable cape. What are you doing with my canary? The Emperor demanded. Listening, she said. How did you get him to sing? I've been trying to coax him into song for months." "You didn't take him seriously enough."
"Who is this woman?" the Emperor asked. "My daughter Polgara," Mr. Wolf said. "She has a particularly keen understanding of birds."
And Farmo says she's good with birds, and the Sharkies say he trolls their Wikipedia page regularly. I like that, like, he recognized them all by sight, but Mandaralin, who he hadn't actually met or seen before or whatever, presumably he had seen depictions of the others, but Mandaralin he recognized just from description. The Emperor laughed suddenly, a harshly skeptical laugh.
"Oh, come now. You really don't expect me to accept that, do you?"
Wolf looked at him gravely.
"Are you really sure you don't know me, Ranboroon?" he asked mildly.
The pale green mantle Grinneg had lent him made him look almost like a Tolnedran. Almost, but not quite.
"It's a clever ruse," the Emperor said. "You look the part, and so does she, but I'm not a child. I gave up fairy tales a long time ago."
Farmo says he seems like he should be played by Wallace Shawn. I need to look at Wallace Shawn. Oh, yeah, that's exactly who I was thinking. That's who I was picturing as well. Inconceivable. Yeah. Maybe I was drifting a little towards that voice. A little. Should I go further with it? I don't know if I can. He's got such a distinct voice.
"I gave up fairy tales a long time ago." "That's a pity. I'd guess that your life's been a little empty since then."
Wolf looked around at the manicured garden with the servants and fountains and the members of the Emperor's personal guard posted unobtrusively here and there among the flower beds.
"Even with all this, Ranboroon, a life without any wonder left in it is flat and stale."
His voice was a little sad.
"I think that perhaps you gave up too much." "Morin," Ranboroon demanded peremptorily, "send for Zeril. We'll settle this immediately." "At once, your highness," Morin said, and beckoned to one of the servants. "May I have my canary back?" the Emperor asked Aunt Pole rather plaintively. "Of course." She moved across the grass toward the chair, stepping slowly to avoid startling the trilling little bird. "Sometimes I wonder what they're saying when they sing," Ranboroon said. "Right now, he's telling me about the day he learned to fly," Aunt Pole said. "That's a very important day for a bird." She reached out her hand, and the canary hopped onto the Emperor's finger, still singing and with its bright eye cocked toward Ranboroon's face. "That's an amusing conceit, I suppose." The little old man smiled, staring out at the sunlight sparkling on the water in one of the fountains. Farmo says, "Oh boy, a wizard off." "But I'm afraid I don't have time for that kind of thing. Right now, the whole nation is holding its breath in anticipation of my death. They all seem to think that the greatest thing I can do for Tolnedra is to die immediately." I'm slipping more towards Wallace Shawn. The Grand Negus. "Some of them have even gone to the trouble of trying to help me along. We caught 4 assassins inside the palace grounds just last week. The Boroons, my own family, are deserting me to the point that I scarcely have enough people left to run the palace, much less the Empire. Ah, here comes Zeril." A lean,
bushy-browed man in a red mantle covered with mystic symbols, oh boy, scurried across the lawn and bowed deeply to the Emperor. "You sent for me, Your Highness." I am informed that this woman is Polgara the sorceress," the Emperor said, "and that the old man there is Belgarath. Be a good fellow, Zariel, and have a look into their credentials." "Belgarath and Polgara," the bushy-browed man scoffed. "Surely your Highness isn't serious. The names are mythological. No such people exist." "You see," the Emperor said to Aunt Pole, "you don't exist. I have it on the very best authority. Zariel's a wizard himself, you know." "Really?" "One of the very best," he assured her. "Of course, most of his tricks are just sleight of hand, since sorcery is only a sham, but he amuses me, and he takes himself very seriously. You may proceed, Zariel, but try not to raise an awful stink, as you usually do." "That won't be necessary, Your Highness," Zariel said flatly. "If they were wizards of any kind, I'd have recognized them immediately. We have special ways of communicating, you know." Aunt Pole looked at the wizard with one eyebrow slightly raised. "I think that you should look a bit closer, Zariel," she suggested. "Sometimes we miss things." She made an almost imperceptible gesture, and Garion seemed to hear a faint rush of sound. The wizard stared, his eyes fixed on open air directly in front of him. His eyes began to bulge, and his face turned deathly pale. As if his legs had been cut from under him, he fell onto his face. "Forgive me, Lady Polgara," he croaked, groveling. "That's supposed to impress me, I assume," the Emperor said. "I've seen men's minds overwhelmed before, however, and Zariel's mind isn't all that strong to begin with." "This is getting tiresome, Ran Boroon," she said tartly. "You really ought to believe her, you know," the canary spoke in a tiny piping voice. "I knew who she was immediately. Of course, we're much more perceptive than you things that creep around on the ground. Why do you do that? If you'd just try, I'm sure you'd be able to fly. And I wish you'd stop eating so much garlic. It makes you smell awful." "Hush now," Aunt Pole said gently to the bird. "You can tell him all about it later." Mickey Canary, I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do with that. How am I supposed to sound like a canary? I can only do so much, okay? The Emperor was trembling violently, and he stared at the bird as if it were a snake. Chucky said they were thinking it was a bit Mickey too, and Farmo says, "I can only not make fun of it so much." I'm gonna have a Pocky. You try sounding like a canary. See if you don't sound like Mickey Mouse. Oh, I summoned the puppy accidentally. He's like, "Plastic?" If I can get one there. I had like vaguely forgotten about the canary when I saw that line and who was speaking. I was like, well, I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about this. I'm just going for it. Licking his chops, looking at me. Okay. Here, on my knee. You can come get him. Right here. Right there. Ahem.
Why don't we all just behave as if we believed that Polgara and I are who we say we are?
Mr. Wolf suggested.
We could spend the rest of the day trying to convince you, and we really don't have that much time. There are some things I have to tell you, and they're important, no matter who I am.
I think I can accept that, Ranboroon said, still trembling and staring at the now silent canary. Sharky say, everyone loves Pocky. Well, he doesn't get Pocky. He gets that puppy treat. And that's maybe why he's looking at me like he's resentful. And then he just leaves. Mr. Wolf clasped his hands behind his back and stared up at a cluster of bickering sparrows on the limb of a nearby tree.
Early last fall, he began, Zedar the Apostate crept into the throne room at Riva and stole the Orb of Aldur.
He did what? Ranboroon demanded, sitting up quickly.
How? We don't know, Wolf answered. When I catch up with him, maybe I'll ask him. I'm sure, however, that you can see the importance of the event.
Obviously, the Emperor said.
The Alorns and the Sendars are quietly preparing for war, Wolf told him.
War? Ranboroon asked in a shocked voice. With whom?
The Angarax, of course.
What's Zedar got to do with the Angarax? He could be acting on his own, couldn't he? Surely you're not that simple, Aunt Pole remarked. You forget yourself, lady, Ranboroon said stiffly. Where's Zedar now? Sharky say, Belgarath is presenting very much like a lawyer addressing the court. Early last fall, Zedar the Apostate Objection! Ahem. Where's Zedar now? Alleged apostate, says Farmhouse.
He went through Tol Honeth about 2 weeks ago,
Wolf replied.
If he can get across the border into one of the Angarak kingdoms before I can stop him, the Alorns will march.
And Arundia with them, Mandoralin said firmly. King Korodulin has also been advised.
You'll tear the world apart,
the Emperor protested.
Perhaps, Wolf admitted, but we can't let Zedar get to Torak with the orb.
I'll send emissaries at once, Ranboroon said. This has to be headed off before it gets out of hand.
It's a little late for that,
Barak said grimly.
Anheg and the others aren't in any mood for Tolnedran diplomacy right now.
Your people have a bad reputation in the north, Your Highness, Silk pointed out. They always seem to have a few trade agreements up their sleeves. Every time Tolnedra mediates a dispute, it seems to cost a great deal. I don't think we can afford your good offices any more. A cloud passed in front of the sun, and the garden seemed suddenly chilly in its shadow. This is being blown all out of proportion, the Emperor protested. The Alorns and the Angarax have been squabbling over that worthless stone for thousands of years. You've been waiting for the chance to fall on each other, and now you've got an excuse. Well, enjoy yourselves. Tolnedra's not going to get involved as long as I'm her emperor. You're not going to be able to sit on one side in this, Ranboroon, Aunt Pole said. Why not? The orb doesn't concern me one way or the other. Go ahead and destroy each other if you want. Tolnedra will still be here when it's all over.
I doubt it, Wolf told him. Your empire's crawling with Murgos. They could overrun you in a week.
They're honest merchants, here on honest business. Murgos don't have honest business, Aunt Pole told him. Every Murgo in Tolnedra is here because he was sent by the Grolim High Priest. That's an exaggeration, Ranboroon said stubbornly. The whole world knows that you and your father have an obsessive hatred of all Angorax, but times have changed.
Cthul Murgos is still ruled from Rak Cthul, Wolf said, and Ktuchik is master there. Ktuchik hasn't changed, even if the world has. The merchants from Rak Goska might seem civilized to you, but they all jump when Ktuchik whistles, and Ktuchik's the disciple of Torak. Torak's dead.
Really? Aunt Pole said. Have you seen his grave? Have you opened the grave and seen his bones? My empire's very expensive to run, the Emperor said, and I need the revenue the Murgos bring me. I've got agents in Rakgoska and all along the South Caravan route, so I'd know if the Murgos were getting ready for any kind of move against me. I'm just a little suspicious that all this might be the result of some internal contention within the Brotherhood of Sorcerers. You people have your own motives, and I'm not going to let you use my empire as a pawn in your power struggles. Sharky say, but capitalism. And if the Angorax win, Aunt Pole said, how do you plan to deal with Torak? I'm not afraid of Torak.
Have you ever met him?
Wolf asked.
Obviously not. Listen, Belgarath, you and your daughter have never been friendly to Tolnedra. You treated us like a defeated enemy after Vomimbre. Your information's interesting, and I'll consider it in its proper perspective. But Tolnedran policy is not dominated by Alorn preconceptions. Our economy relies heavily on trade along the South Caravan route. I'm not going to disrupt my empire simply because you happen to dislike Murgos.
You're a fool, then,
Wolf said bluntly.
You'd be surprised at how many people think so, the Emperor replied. Maybe you'll have better luck with my successor. If he's a Vorduvian or a Honeth, you might even be able to bribe him. But Boroons don't take bribes.
Or advice, Aunt Pole added.
Only when it suits us, Lady Polgara,
Ranboroon said.
I think we've done everything we can here,
Wolf decided. A bronze door at the back of the garden slammed open, and a tiny girl with flaming hair stormed through, her eyes ablaze. At first, Garion thought she was a child, but as she came closer, he realized that she was somewhat older than that. Although she was very small, the short, sleeveless green tunic she wore displayed limbs that were much closer to maturity. He felt a peculiar kind of shock when he saw her. Almost, but not quite, like recognition. Her hair was a tumbled mass with long, elaborate curls cascading down over her neck and shoulders, and it was a color that Garion had never seen before, a deep, burnished red that seemed somehow to glow from within. Her skin was a golden color that seemed, as she swept through the shadows of the trees near the gate, to have an almost greenish cast to it. She was in a state verging on sheer rage. How do I do this? I don't know how to do this.
Why am I being kept prisoner here? She demanded of the Emperor. I hope that's okay. What are you talking about? Ran Boroon asked. The Legionnaires won't let me leave the palace grounds. Oh, the Emperor said. That. Exactly, that. They're acting on my orders, Senedra, the Emperor told her. So they said. Tell them to stop it. No. No? Her tone was incredulous. No! Her voice climbed several octaves. What do you mean, no? I tried to make my voice climb several octaves. It's too dangerous for you to be out in the city just now, the Emperor said placatingly. Nonsense, she snapped. I don't intend to sit around in this stuffy palace just because you're afraid of your own shadow. I need some things from the market. Send someone. I don't want to send anyone, she shouted at him. I want to go myself. Well, you can't, he said flatly. Spend your time on your studies instead. I don't want to study, she cried. Jeebers is a stuffy idiot, and he bores me. I don't want to sit around talking about history or politics or any of the rest of it. I just want an afternoon to myself. I'm sorry. Please, Father, she begged, and her tone dropping into a wheedling note. Sharky says she wanted to go to the Toshi station to pick up some power converters. Please, Father, she begged, her tone dropping into a wheedling note. She took hold of one of the folds of his gold mantle and twisted it around one of her tiny fingers. Please. The look she directed at the Emperor through her lashes would have melted stone. Absolutely not, he said, refusing to look at her. My order stands. You will not leave the palace grounds. I hate you, she cried. Then she ran from the garden in tears. My daughter, the Emperor explained, almost apologetically. You can't imagine what it's like having a child like that.
Oh, I can imagine, all right,
Mr. Wolf said, glancing at Aunt Pole. Sharky say his real mistake was hiring a tutor named Jeebers Creepers. And Farmos and Sharky both laughing at Mr. Wolf's burn on Polgara. She looked back at him, her eyes challenging. Go ahead and say it, Father, she told him. I'm sure you won't be happy until you do. Wolf shrugged.
Forget it.
Ranboroon looked thoughtfully at the two of them. It occurs to me that we might be able to negotiate a bit here, he said, his eyes narrowing.
What did you have in mind?
Wolf asked. You have a certain authority among the Alorns, the Emperor suggested. Some, Wolf admitted carefully. If you were to ask them, I'm sure they'd be willing to overlook one of the more absurd provisions in the Accords of Vomimbre.
Which one is that?
There's really no necessity for Senedra to journey to Riva, is there? I'm the last emperor of the Boroon dynasty, and when I die, she won't be an imperial princess anymore. Under the circumstances, I'd say that the requirement doesn't really apply to her. It's nonsense anyway. The line of the Revan King became extinct 1,300 years ago, so there isn't going to be any bridegroom waiting for her in the hall of the Revan King. As you've seen, Tolnedra's a very dangerous place just now. Sinedra's 16th birthday is only a year or so off, and the date's well known. If I have to send her to Riva, half the assassins in the Empire are going to be lurking outside the palace gates, waiting for her to come out. I'd rather not take that kind of risk. If you could see your way clear to speak to the Alorns, I might be able to make a few concessions regarding the Murgos. Restrictions on their numbers, closed areas, that sort of thing.
Sharky say, a year or so? Does he actually know his daughter's birthday? Well, I mean, there's no need to go through the mental math of saying exactly how far off it is there? Like, if we're in, June. No, sorry. Like, if we're in late July, I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to say here. If we're in like late July, I'm not going to say the exact number of days and months till my birthday. I'll say it's, a little less than a year away. Farmo says if she hasn't had her 15th yet, it might be a year and a bit. Yeah. So, restrictions on their numbers, closed areas, that sort of thing. No, Ran Boroon, Aunt Pole said flatly. Sinedra will go to Riva. You've failed to understand that the accords are only a formality. If your daughter's the one destined to become the bride of the Revan King, no force on earth can prevent her from being in the throne room at Riva on the appointed day. My father's recommendations about the Murgos are only suggestions, for your own good. What you choose to do about the matter is your affair. I think we've just about exhausted the possibilities of this conversation, the Emperor stated coldly. Two important-looking officials came into the garden and spoke briefly to Lord Morin. Your Highness, the gray-haired chamberlain said deferentially, the Minister of Trade wanted to inform you that he's reached an excellent agreement with the trade deputation from Rakgoska. The gentlemen from Ctholmurgos were most accommodating. I'm delighted to hear it, Ran Boroon said, throwing a meaningful look at Mr. Wolf. The contingent from Rakgoska would like to pay their respects before they leave, Morin added. By all means, the Emperor said. I'll be delighted to receive them here. Spiteful. Morin turned and nodded shortly to the two officials near the gate. The officials turned and spoke to someone outside, and the gate swung open. Farmo says, Asherak? 5 Murgos strode into the garden. Their coarse black robes were hooded, but the hoods were thrown back. The front of their robes were unclasped, and the chainmail shirts they all wore gleamed in the sunlight. The Murgo in front was a bit taller than the others, and his bearing indicated that he was the leader of the deputation. A welter of images and partial memories flooded Garion's mind as he looked at the scar-faced enemy he had known all his life. The strange pull of the silent, hidden linkage between them touched him. It was Asherak. Farmo says, bingo! Something brushed Garion's mind, tentative only, not the powerful force the Murgo had directed at him in the dim hallway in Anheg's palace at Val Elorn. The amulet under his tunic became very cold, and yet seemed to burn at the same time. I'm not going to read that out loud. That seems inappropriate. It's not, but it sounds that way.
Your Imperial Highness,
Asherak said,
striding forward with a cold smile.
"We are honored to be admitted into your august presence."
He bowed, his mail shirt clinking. Barak was holding Hetar's right arm firmly, and Mandaralan moved and took the other. They're afraid he's going to strangle him in the spot. "I'm overjoyed to see you again, worthy Asherak," the Emperor said. "I'm told that an agreement has been reached."
"Beneficial to both sides, Your Highness."
"The best kind of agreement," Ranboroon approved.
"Tar Urgas, King of the Murgos, sends greetings," Asherak said. "His Majesty feels most keenly the desirability of cementing relations between Cthul Murgos and Tolnidra. He hopes that one day he may call your Imperial Highness brother."
"We respect the peaceful intentions and legendary wisdom of Tar Urgas," the Emperor smiled with a certain smugness. Asherak looked around, his black eyes flat.
"Well, Ambar," he said to Silk, "your fortunes seem to have improved since we met last in Mingan's counting room in Dareen."
Silk spread his hands in an innocent-looking gesture. "The gods have been kind. Most of them, anyway." Asherak smiled briefly. "You know each other?" the Emperor asked, a bit surprised. "We've met, Your Highness," Silk admitted.
"In another kingdom,"
Asherak added. He looked directly then at Mr. Wolf.
"Belgarath," he said politely with a brief nod. "Chamdar," the old man replied.
Chamdar. Chamdar and Asherak are the same person. We now have confirmation. I think we had that kind of implied before, but it could have been just a coincidence that Chamdar used the same trick as Asherak. Nope.
"You're looking well."
They sound very similar to each other. A lot of my voices are getting too close.
"Thank you."
"It seems that I'm the only stranger here," the Emperor said.
"Chamdar and I have known each other for a very long time,"
Mr. Wolf told him. He glanced at the Murgo with a faintly malicious twinkle in his eyes.
"I see that you've managed to recover from your recent indisposition."
Asherak's face flickered with annoyance, and he looked quickly at his shadow on the grass, as if for reassurance. Garion remembered what Wolf had said atop the tor after the attack of the Algroths. Something about a shadow returning by an indirect route. For some reason, the information that Asherak the Murgo and Chamdar the Grolim were the same man did not particularly surprise him. Like a complex melody that had been faintly out of tune, the sudden merging of the two seemed right somehow. The knowledge clicked in his mind like a key in a lock.
"Someday you'll have to show me how you did that," Asherak was saying. "I found the experience interesting. My horse had hysterics, however." "My apologies to your horse."
"Why is it that I feel as if I'm missing about half of this conversation?" Ranboroon asked.
"Forgive us, Your Highness," Asherak said. "Ancient Belgarath and I are renewing an old enmity. We've seldom had the opportunity to speak to each other with any degree of civility."
He turned and bowed politely to Aunt Pole.
"My Lady Polgara, you're as beautiful as ever."
He eyed her
with a deliberately suggestive stare. You haven't changed much either, Chamdar. Her tone was mild, even bland, but Geryon, who knew her so well, recognized immediately the deadly insult she had just delivered to the Grolem.
Charming,
Asherak said with a faint smile.
This is better than a play, the Emperor cried delightedly. You people are actually dripping with malice. I wish I'd had the opportunity to see the first act.
The first act was very long, Your Highness, Asherak said, and quite often tedious. As you may have noticed, Belgarath sometimes gets carried away with his own cleverness. I'm certain I'll be able to make up for that, Mr. Wolf told him with a slight smile. I promise you that the last act will be extremely short, Chamdar. Threats, old man? Asherak asked. I thought we'd agreed to be civilized. I can't recall when we ever agreed on anything, Wolf said. He turned to the Emperor. I think we'll leave now, Ranboroon, he said. With your permission, of course.
Of course, the Emperor replied. I'm pleased to have met you, though I still don't believe in you, naturally. My skepticism, however, is theological, not personal.
I'm glad of that,
Wolf said, and quite suddenly he grinned impishly at the Emperor. Ranboroon laughed.
I look forward to our next meeting, Belgarath,
Asherak said.
I wouldn't if I were you,
Wolf advised him, then turned and led the way out of the Emperor's garden. That's the end of chapter 16 on page 187. Chapter 17 doesn't look too long. That was fun. There are some good bits there. Oh boy. What did everybody think of those two chapters? Canary. Oh boy. Pharma says,
You're Belgarath and Polgara? Inconceivable.
Sharky says, some great verbal dueling. Mrs. says it was like a comedy of manners. Pharma says,
never trust an Alorn when death is on the line.
Is that right? Should it be never trust a Tolnedran? What's the actual line? Never trust a... Just fit better for pacing. Yeah, fair enough. So I feel like there were a few sort of subtly important things in this chapter. I also feel like Ranboroon is maybe the first person who just fully has insisted on not believing in magic at all. There was the knight in Erendia, but he was quickly shown magic and then fully became a believer right then and there. Ranboroon was subtly shown magic and was still maintaining a little bit of skepticism. It definitely shook him, but I could see him explaining that away to himself later, that it was just somebody, you know, ventriloquism or something like that. And some trick of animal manipulation. And at the end, my belief in my I still don't believe in you, but it's theological, not personal. I like that line. Parma says, and he wasn't believing they were Belgarath and Polgara. Oh, the knight wasn't believing they were Belgarath and Polgara. He never said anything about magic. Yeah, somewhat. And also he was kind of, I think, still directly being rude to Mandaralan specifically as well. So he was throwing shade by doubting his companions. We met the Emperor's daughter, Senedra, which I'm guessing at how her name is pronounced. CE apostrophe NEDRA. So I'm gonna say Senedra, I think. That's how I've always kind of read it in my head. And Belgarath threw literal shade. Oh, because I thought you meant because he sent Asherak's shadow away. He threw shade. But no, you meant because he made a tree. I like mine better. But yeah, there was a lot of back and forth in the Emperor's Garden. Especially once Asherak showed up. There are certain things that I'm like, reading the book now, I'm like, this is all so obvious. How did I not see this the first time I read the book? Everyone else at this point knows exactly what's happening and what's going to happen, whatever. But at the time I was much younger, so a lot of stuff later kind of caught me by surprise. Somebody else is here? Books, Brews, and Booze is in the chat. Or at least in the list of people. Hello. I don't know how long you've been around, but we've been reading Queen of Sorcery by David Eddings. We're about halfway through. It's the second book out of a series of 5. Which could be considered a series. Well, it's 2 series of 5, one after the other, I suppose. Yeah. But we've read several books before now. We started with The Hobbit because, of course. And we've also read Guards by Sir Terry Pratchett. And then the book preceding this one, Pawn of Prophecy. So, welcome if there's somebody behind the username. I'm here every Wednesday and Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. We just read and talk about the book. And yeah, if, as Farmos is saying, if you want to see any of what we've read before, it's all on YouTube. Same name, Sleet Reads. I'm Sleet. Hi. So yeah, I think that was a fun couple of chapters. I think there was some interesting stuff there. I think there were way too many voices, some of which I'm letting drift too close to each other. Although in some cases, like Chamdar and Belgarath sounding similar, I think kind of makes sense. Grinneg and Barak sounding similar absolutely makes sense. I just have to make sure that when they're speaking with one another, it's easy enough to distinguish who is who. Who is whom? I'm not sure. And I was finding with Grinneg and Barak, I thought that was easier, but with Chamdar and Belgarath, they were a little too close. I ended up actually making Belgarath sound a little more nasally, I think, than he normally does, which is probably the wrong way, and I was trying to make Chamdar sound a little more menacing in tone, I suppose. And then a 14 or 15-year-old girl. Not the easiest voice for me to try to do. Yeah. Well, anyways, it's nearly 9 o'clock. So, I hope everybody has a lovely weekend. Doesn't look like anybody on my list is streaming right now. Yeah. Anything interesting this weekend? The 12th and 13th? At some point, I'm gonna watch on Disney Plus, what's it called? Turning Red? I think it's called Turning Red, right? The new Pixar movie about the little girl in Toronto that transforms into a giant red panda. That looks like a fun movie. I've actually been kind of looking forward to seeing that one. I'm intrigued. That's up on Disney Plus now. So, if you all check it out as well, maybe we'll do a spoiler-free talk about it later or something. Ooh, Sharky, say part 1 of 2, question mark, of your D&D campaign finale tomorrow. That's exciting. You're actually gonna finish a game. That's an achievement. I don't mean that in like a disrespectful way, but for any game that's like longer than like two or like a one shot or like 2 or 3 sessions or whatever, actually like getting to the end of a game, I feel like is a big accomplishment. So many games seem to just kind of peter out and just die silently. It's just sad. It's tough. It's tough to finish a game of D&D. And if your group isn't like in sync with their schedules, where everybody is like got, a slot of time available every week and they're consistent about it. If it's not like that, and even then, but if it's not like that, then it's like finishing a game feels like a Herculean challenge. Farmouse's hand was trapped by a puppy. Says my voices were good. When they started drifting to one another, I could tell by the tone most of the time. And Sinedra was fine. She was not cringy, except in the way of 15-year-old whiny girls. 15-year-old children in general. I don't think that that's gender specific. I think any 15-year-old has the capability of cringe. But I suppose there might be differences between what kind of cringe. All right. Well, have a good weekend. I'll be back here next Wednesday. Same sleep time, same sleep channel. Be weird if it were somewhere else. Daylight savings? Oh, it's not the same time. Is that this weekend? This is the good one, right? This is the one where we get more daylight. This is the one that we should make permanent and stop all this tomfoolery. This is the bad one? What? I don't want the bad one. Why is this the bad one? But it is the one you should keep. It's the bad one because we have to wake up earlier. More sunlight, but we lose an hour. Mm-hmm. Sleep well, sea sharkies. Yeah, when I get to it. All right. Have a good night. Okay, bye. I will see you next Wednesday. Bye. Okay, goodbye. Okay, bye now. Bye.